On the 15th of May in the year 1943, somewhere to the west of Kansas, a young man named Feldwebel Vera Hartmann found himself gazing intently through the glass of a train window. He was barely 20 years old, yet he had already been traveling for a full 3 days since his departure from Camp Shanks, located in New York. During this entire span, he had observed the vast, ever-changing landscape of America rolling past him. Fields, towns, and endless stretches of countryside, all moving in a slow, rhythmic procession. For 3 days, he had been trying to make sense of what he was seeing, attempting to grasp the reality behind the scenes unfolding outside his window. The train gradually slowed down near a dusty station named Amarillo, situated in the heart of Texas. As it paused, a man stood on the platform, dressed in leather chaps and a wide-brimmed hat, intently watching the train's approach. A true American cowboy, nothing like the idealized figures portrayed on posters or seen in Hollywood movies, but an authentic figure emanating the rugged spirit of the West. He was quietly rolling a cigarette, squinting into the intense Texas sun that cast long shadows over the arid landscape. Hartmann, along with 499 other German prisoners of war, was about to step into a world that Joseph Goebbels, an influential figure in their ranks, had often claimed did not exist. These soldiers had mostly been captured during their campaigns at Kasserine Pass in Tunis, Sicily, and in the desert battles under Rommel. They were men who had fought fiercely in the North African sands, expecting to meet their end amidst scorching heat and relentless danger. Men who believed their fight might be over in the harsh expanse of the desert. Yet, their story was taking an unexpected turn. They found themselves in a different desert, one vastly unlike the one they had anticipated, with outcomes unexpectedly different from their prior expectations. For these prisoners, the propaganda machine of Nazi Germany had meticulously painted a grim picture of their future captivity in America. They had been told stories of barbarism and torture awaiting them in the hands of their captors, predictions that the Americans would treat them as animals, barbaric mongrels with no regard for culture or decency. The image of America they had internalized was one of softness, decadence, and moral decay. An American nation of mixed races, devoid of true honor, ruled by gangsters and cowboys, lacking the sophistication that their ideology valued. The first stark shocks, however, had come even before stepping onto American soil, aboard the prison transport ships. Instead of the brutal conditions they expected, the prisoners found themselves served white bread, genuine coffee, and 3 hot meals every day. These were more than they had seen in months, matching the rations that American soldiers received in accordance with international agreements, such as the Geneva Convention. It was a startling revelation. The horrors they had been warned of sharply contrasted with this surprising hospitality. As their journey carried them further into Texas, the contradictions of their new environment multiplied vividly through the train's windows. They saw sprawling farmland stretching endlessly in every direction, with herds of cattle grazing lazily across wide plains that seemed to go on forever. They observed oil derricks tirelessly pumping black gold from the earth, dark and glistening against the sunlit landscape. Towns emerged, illuminated by electric lights, connected by paved roads, with automobiles humming along, an indication of modern prosperity and progress. One of the prisoners, many years later, would send a letter home, describing the scene. Americans possessed so abundantly that they not only had plenty for themselves, but also shared generously with their enemies. It was an astonishing revelation for men who hay-dived in the harsh realities of war and hardship, seeing firsthand how wealth and abundance coexisted with a spirit of kindness and openness. Their destination was Camp Hearn, located about 30 miles northwest of Houston, built to house around 4,800 prisoners. In reality, the camp resembled a small American town, embedded within the cotton-growing region of Texas. When the buses from the train station arrived, they drove through the main gate, leading the prisoners into a setting unlike what they had expected, a far cry from the fortified, heavily guarded prisons they had envisioned. Instead of machine gun towers, attack dogs, and brutal guards, they found well-equipped barracks with electricity, indoor plumbing, hot showers, and flush toilets, amenities that many of them had lacked during their time in Germany. The camp's commanding officer addressed them through a translator, explaining the simple yet surprisingly generous rules. Prisoners were to work 8 hours each day, adhere to regulations, and cause no trouble. In exchange, they would be provided with 3 substantial meals daily, and they would be paid wages of 80 cents per day in camp script, an amount that seemed extraordinary compared to their previous experiences. The prisoners were also granted access to a canteen, recreation facilities, and received correspondence from loved ones back home. Friedrich Becke, one of the prisoners, was unable to process this information at first. The notion of being paid wages equivalent to those earned by American privates, who made $50 a month, was almost incomprehensible. Overwhelmed by this reality, he struggled to believe that their treatment was so different from what they'd been told. The next morning, the prisoners were introduced to their supervisors, not infantry soldiers, but local ranchers, cotton farmers, and cattlemen. These men wore worn denim and leather boots, laboring in the fields, their hands needed for harvesting crops. Texas cotton fields sprawled across thousands of acres, vital to the nation's economy and feeding half the free world. Yet, without enough workers to tend the crops, a large portion of this important harvest risked rotting in the fields, threatening the very livelihood of the region and perhaps, in some way, the production that sustained a nation at war. The men in charge of these agricultural operations were not just farmers, but crucial cogs in a system that was feeding millions, underpinning the war effort overseas, while Americans fought in distant lands such as Italy and preparing for a bigger campaign in France. In the vast and rugged landscapes of Texas, there is a belief that the German prisoners of war might hold the key to every farmer's greatest hopes. A local rancher named John Davidson gazes steadily at a group of prisoners assembled before him. His purpose is clear. He needs 40 men to work in his cotton fields, to help harvest the crop that this land produces in abundance each year. His eyes settle on the tallest and strongest among the prisoners, those men who seem capable of enduring the grueling effort that awaits. Without hesitation, Davidson does something that surprises everyone present. He walks directly toward them, extends his hand in a gesture of goodwill, and introduces himself in a calm, commanding voice. In the state of Texas, he explains through a translator that it is customary to shake hands before beginning to work together, to establish a sense of trust and mutual respect. Men from very different backgrounds often exchange firm handshakes as a sign of cooperation and understanding. The German officer Wilhelm Miller, a writer and a man who 6 months earlier had been fighting against American troops in Tunisia, now finds himself face to face with the reality of his new situation. He watches as Davidson's outstretched hand hovers in the air, a symbol of possible reconciliation. Despite his initial hesitation, he accepts the handshake. Davidson's grip is strong, firm, and rough, a hand that bears the marks of hard labor, worn and calloused from years of manual work. Such a handshake encapsulates the gritty, honest nature of a working man. Meanwhile, the sprawling cotton fields of Brazos County extend endlessly beneath the relentless Texas sun. The daily labor is arduous and unyielding. Backs ache, fingers bleed from handling rough twine and sacks weighing hundreds of pounds, and sweat drips down weary faces. Yet, amid the struggles, something remarkable begins to unfold. The prisoners, the Mexican migrant workers, the black sharecroppers, and the poor white tenant farmers, all different racial and social groups, share the same sun, the same soil, and the same labor. The racial hierarchies that Nazi ideology so vehemently preached and promoted are gradually collapsing under the unifying force of hard work and shared hardship. Everyone sweats just as much, endures similar aches, and drinks from the same water buckets without concern for race or background. As noon approaches, Rosa Martinez, the ranch's cheerful cook, rings the dinner bell. The prisoners, expecting a meager meal of bread and water, as they might have thought fitting for prisoners, are instead greeted with a feast: hearty beef stew, freshly baked cornbread, sweet iced tea, and warm slices of apple pie. Rosa, who doesn't speak German, or the prisoners, who don't speak Spanish, communicate with gestures, smiles, and kindness. Despite the language barrier, Rosa ladles generous portions onto their plates and offers warm smiles, embodying a universal language rooted in compassion and hospitality. That simple act of sharing food, of offering kindness across language and cultural divides, leaves an indelible mark. Vera Hartman, one of the prisoners, will remember this meal vividly for the rest of his life, not because of its taste, but because of the woman's genuine kindness towards men labeled as enemies by her homeland. Rose's empathy defies the rigid narratives of hatred, proving that human decency can prevail even amid turmoil. Later, as evening falls, the atmosphere at Camp Hearn shifts from hardship to celebration. In the recreation hall, music fills the air, not the martial marches or Nazi anthems one might expect on a wartime military base. Instead, the tune comes from the radio, melodies of Western swing, featuring the legendary Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys. It's a sound that encapsulates the essence of America in the year of 1943, lively, optimistic, and full of spirit. After Italy switched sides in September of that year, the Italian prisoners of war gained more freedom, provided they adhered to strict guidelines. They were allowed to attend local dances, sharing evenings of music and socialization, always under supervision, always controlled, yet offering a taste of normal life during a time of chaos. Observing this, German prisoners cast envious glances at their Italian counterparts, yearning for similar moments of respite. Some camps later introduced carefully monitored social events, controlled gatherings that permitted prisoners to experience fleeting slices of normalcy, providing psychological relief amidst the hardships of captivity. Amidst their confinement, many prisoners banded together to form their own musical groups, learning and performing American songs. Some of them composed new tunes, blending their native melodies with Western swing styles, a fusion that exists nowhere else in the world, a testament to their creativity born out of necessity and longing for freedom. These musical endeavors fostered camaraderie and hope, bridging cultural divides through shared melodies. Meanwhile, the letters these prisoners sent home created their own internal crises. How could they describe these experiences to loved ones suffering through relentless Allied bombings? How could they convey a world filled with abundance and freedom to mothers standing in ration lines or wives who had not seen meat in months? Friedrich Becker, a prisoner from Hamburg, wrote to his wife, claiming, "The Americans are not what we were told. They have given us warm clothing and sturdy boots. We eat meat every day. I am saving my wages so that when I return, we will have enough money." In these words, he omits the truth: the abundance of goods, the bright electric lights burning through the night, the multitude of cars owned by farmers, the packed stores filled with commodities. How could he acknowledge this? She would find it unbelievable, and the authorities might not allow such truths to reach her, filtering and censoring the reality from the message. Yet, beneath the surface, a different world exists, a world of prosperity and comfort that contrasts sharply with the hardships faced by many at home, a truth suppressed by necessity and silence. Camp Milan is situated near Amarillo, a place where the phrase cowboys isn't just a figure of speech, but a literal reality. Here, the individuals who tend to the cattle are genuine cowhands, seasoned in the skills and traditions of the American West, and they are in desperate need of assistance in managing the thousands of bovine animals that roam the vast grazing lands. The ranch owner, Thomas Anderson, carefully observes the newcomers, an eclectic mix of Luftwaffe pilots, Panzer crew members, and Yugoslav sailors, who have been brought here to learn the ropes. Remarkably, none of these men have ever had the experience of seeing a cow up close before. Anderson lets out a weary sigh, acknowledging that this situation is bound to lead to some interesting moments. Determined to start from the very beginning, he begins instructing them on the essentials: the proper way to approach a horse, how to properly hold and handle a rope, and most importantly, how to avoid getting kicked, bitten, or trampled. The Germans, for their part, are visibly terrified of the cattle, unsure of how to approach these large, unpredictable animals, while the animals, sensing their unfamiliarity, are naturally suspicious of their new handlers. At first, mutual distrust is evident, a barrier that seems insurmountable. Yet, Anderson remains patient. He understands that trust takes time. After all, his own son is at that very moment flying B-7 planes over Germany, dropping bombs from the skies. These young men in front of him are also someone's sons, after all. Whether they are enemies or not, they are here on this land, and in the end, cattle care nothing about politics or wartime allegiances. Within just a few weeks, something almost magical begins to happen. The Germans, initially terrified and unsure, start to adapt, and they demonstrate a surprising aptitude for ranching, perhaps as if they were born for it. It could be their military discipline, meticulously following procedures and routines. Or maybe it's their engineering minds, which appreciate the logistical aspects of moving and managing large herds of cattle. Or perhaps it's simply that working with animals offers a raw, honest kind of fulfillment, something that war never quite provides. Among them, a man named Erich Schmidt, an American serviceman, becomes Anderson's most skilled horseman. Schmidt can rope, brand, and heel cattle with a level of expertise that rivals the best in the field. By nightfall, he often sketches the landscape around him, capturing a sunset over the plains, the longhorns silhouetted against the evening sky. Moreover, he depicts scenes of cowboys and Germans working side by side, sharing tasks with an easy camaraderie that would have been unfathomable elsewhere. These images, these moments of unity across enemy lines, are rare and precious. They reflect a harmony born out of common effort and mutual respect, an extraordinary sight for the formation of a broader, more human understanding. In the year of 1943, on a Sunday morning within the various camps, German prisoners of war organized their own religious services. Lutheran ministers and Catholic priests among the prisoners lead worship, offering spiritual solace. The American military authorities, respecting their beliefs, provide them with hymnals, religious materials, and the freedom to practice their faith, even while on enemy soil. Some of the camps go further, arranging special permits that allow prisoners to attend local churches on major religious holidays. On Christmas of 1944, a small group of German prisoners sit quietly in the back pews of an American church. The hymn they sing is Silent Night, performed in its original German language. They know every word, every note, and by the third verse, tears well up in some of their eyes, not because of sadness, but because of the overwhelming emotion triggered by this act of kindness and recognition. Many are overwhelmed by the fact that, in an enemy land and amidst war, they are being treated as human beings, deserving dignity. On December 23, 1944, at Camp Papago Park in Arizona, 25 Yugoslavian sailors, U-boat sailors, had been digging a tunnel for 3 months. Their painstaking efforts culminated tonight in a daring escape. They had devised a plan that was, in its own way, brilliantly foolish. Their goal was to float down the Salt River to reach Mexico, seeking freedom and hoping for a future where they might live without oppression until their homeland's victory in the war. They constructed a collapsible boat, carefully studied maps, and stored enough food to sustain themselves. Led by Captain Littman Hanser Kraus, the group emerged under the bright glow of a full moon into the empty, silent desert. For a moment, they experienced pure freedom. Without hesitation, they ran toward the river, only to halt abruptly. To their dismay, the Salt River, so clearly marked on their outdated maps, was entirely dry. No water, just parched sand and hard rocks stretched out before them. Their plans, relying on outdated information from the year of 1880, had failed. There was no way to float away. Their boat was useless, and the dream of escape was suddenly shattered. Without hesitation, they scattered into the surrounding desert, each trying to find a way out on their own. Within hours, they found themselves hopelessly lost amidst the rugged Arizona landscape. December nights in the desert were cruel, freezing cold after the sun set, and unbearable heat during the day. They had no water, little food, and no idea where they had ended up. Johann Kramer, an underproper officer in their group, eventually stumbled into a gas station near Phoenix after wandering for 3 days. His face was sunburned, his body dehydrated, and hallucinations had begun to set in. He was a man broken by the harshness of their failed escape attempt, faced with an uncertain and perilous future. The elderly man who tended to him, a kindly figure named Pete, offered him a simple glass of cool water to quench his thirst and prepared a humble sandwich, nourishing him with care and patience in that moment of desperation. After tending to his immediate needs, Pete promptly contacted the authorities, initiating the process of bringing help and order to the situation. As they waited for the arriving officers, Pete shared his own coffee with the visitor, engaging in quiet conversation about his life and experiences. revealing that he had a son stationed in the distant Pacific. The tale of this man's fatherly love was intertwined with stories of two sons, one lost in the searing desert, the other fallen in a distant war, highlighting the profound sacrifices and heartbreaks that mark so many families during times of conflict. Meanwhile, Captain Jürgen Buttenberg had traveled the furthest, making it all the way into the heart of downtown Phoenix. He was sitting on Van Buren Street on the cold morning of January 28th when a street cleaner, noticing his accent and demeanor, reported him to the police. Officers found the captain physically exhausted and emotionally homesick, his spirit worn down by the hardships of displacement and the longing for familiarity. Yet, despite his escape attempt, he found himself reminded that America, vast and abundant, still held qualities that made it impossible to despise or fully abandon. The land, with its comfort and plentifulness, remained distinctly American, an irresistible promise of hope amid hardship. Spring of 1945 marked a pivotal moment as the war in Europe drew to its close. As the fighting subsided, the atmosphere within the concentration camps shifted drastically. The once confident hope of victory curved into despair as letters from loved ones ceased arriving, and entire cities lay in ruins, their streets cratered and their buildings reduced to rubble. Families had been scattered across continents or lost entirely in the chaos. For many prisoners, the question persisted: what could they possibly return to? Thomas Anderson, a rancher with a generous spirit, made a heartfelt offer to the German prisoners working on his land. He wished they could stay and continue working on his ranch, offering to sponsor them if circumstances allowed. The pay was generous, $100 a month, plus room and board, a sum that far exceeded what they would have earned in a still-standing Germany, where the war's devastation had wiped out economic stability. Yet, international law, the dictates of the Geneva Convention, left no room for discretion. All prisoners of war had to be repatriated, sent back to their homelands regardless of personal wishes. The question of adaptation or accommodation was simply overridden by legal obligation. But what awaited them back home? Occupation by the Soviets, crumbling infrastructure, starvation? Across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, ranchers petitioned their congressmen fiercely. They argued that these men were no longer just prisoners. They had become part of the local communities, neighbors, friends, and the very best workers they'd ever known. Despite this, the law persisted. The mandatory repatriation had to proceed. Victory in Europe was officially declared on May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Germany capitulated, surrendering unconditionally after over a decade of conflict. In the camp at Herne, the prisoners sat in somber silence as they listened to the radio broadcasts announcing the end of the war. Their homeland was gone, destroyed by years of relentless bombing and warfare. The Third Reich, which had claimed it would last 1,000 years, had collapsed after merely 12. Everything they had fought for, ideals, ambitions, dreams, lay in ashes and rubble. Yet amid the despair, something remarkable was quietly emerging. In these camps, amid the ranches and churches, a new understanding was taking shape, an awareness of shared humanity, friendship, and the possibility of a different future, one unimagined before. That very night, John Davidson arrived at the camp with a bottle of fine bourbon, a rare, pre-war whiskey that spoke of a different time. He shared the drink with Wilhelm Miller and the German workers who had toiled on his fields, toasting to the closing of war, to those lost on all sides, and to whatever might come in the days ahead. Mueller, speaking through an interpreter who was no longer necessary, expressed a heartfelt desire to return to the United States someday, if possible. America had shown him something that Germany never could, that strength did not require cruelty, that true power did not depend on hatred. Over shared cotton fields and cattle drives, enemies had become friends, forging bonds that transcended their differences. Beginning in 1946, the process of repatriation commenced, with trains reversing their journey eastward toward port cities, then ships carrying prisoners back to Europe, a journey to a shattered homeland. But these Germans carried something more valuable than military secrets. They carried knowledge and understanding, an awareness of American farming methods, organizational skills, and the proud, abundant way of life that had inspired them. They observed that America's prosperity was no miracle, but the result of techniques, machinery, and management, tools that could be learned, adapted, and replicated. Most poignantly, they encountered genuine Americans, people like Thomas Anderson teaching them to ride, Rosa Martinez offering extra helpings of stew, John Davidson extending handshakes of camaraderie, and Pete, the kind caretaker offering water to an escaped prisoner. People whose stories painted a stark contrast to the propaganda caricatures they had believed before. When they shared and recounted these stories back in Germany, few believed the versions of Americans they had heard, aware that the truth was often more complex and compassionate than the stereotypes suggested. The narrative that Americans treated prisoners with more humanity and compassion than Germany ever extended to its own soldiers simply cannot be dismissed as mere fantasy or exaggeration. Such a statement defies logic, yet the overwhelming weight of historical evidence supports it. During the years from 1943 to 1946, approximately 425,000 German prisoners of war found themselves working in American fields, helping to sustain the very infrastructure that supported the Allied victory. These prisoners contributed significantly, harvesting countless millions of dollars worth of crops, picking cotton by the ton in the hot sun, and salvaging invaluable harvests that would otherwise have rotted away and used. It was through the efforts of these German captives that the remarkable American agricultural miracle unfolded, providing vital sustenance for the Allied war effort and showcasing a form of cooperation and mercy rarely associated with wartime hostilities. The evidence paints a clear picture. German prisoners of war played an essential role in the success of American farming endeavors, and their treatment stands out as remarkably humane. By the year of 1950, an extraordinary turning point occurred. The laws governing immigration were revised, opening the gates for the former prisoners who had once been held in captivity to return to the United States, not as prisoners anymore, but as immigrants seeking new beginnings. They arrived aboard ships departing from German ports like Hamburg and Bremen, embarking on journeys not of captivity, but of opportunity. In this new chapter of their lives, they sought the America that had taken shape during their incarceration, a land of promise and possibility. One such individual was a sergeant from the Africa Corps who returned to Texas in the year of 1951. To meet him at the train station was to see a man transformed. John Davidson, as he was known, was met with the same handshake his captors had given him before, but this time with a firmer grip and a smile that spoke of hope. His English, once a foreign language, had become fluent and confident, with a clear Texas twang that made him sound like a genuine cowboy. He married a local girl, settling into a life defined not by war, but by work. He started a machine shop, repairing tractors and agricultural equipment, becoming a productive member of his community. His son would later attend Texas A&M University to study agriculture, following a path rooted in the land and in service. The grandson, embodying the next generation, would serve bravely in Afghanistan as part of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division. The cycle of transformation was complete. What began as captivity turned into integration and fulfillment. Another former prisoner made his way back to Arizona, where opportunities awaited him. Thomas Anderson, considered the finest horseman he had ever trained, found a job that suited his skills. Over time, he purchased his own ranch, spanning 500 acres near Tucson, where he bred quarter horses, winning prizes at state fairs and gaining recognition for his expertise. To his neighbors, his background was just another story. In Arizona, the measure of a person was how diligently they worked, not where they were from. Even one of the men who escaped from the Papago Park POW camp eventually returned legally, establishing a small business in Phoenix, not far from the place of his escape. The irony was undeniable. Former enemies, once locked in conflict, now sharing the same community, building lives side by side. Decades later, the circle of reconciliation widened further as former prisoners of war returned to visit the very camps where they had once been held. They brought photo albums filled with memories, images of young men in Wehrmacht uniforms learning to pick cotton, roping cattle, and realizing that their captors, their enemies, were also human beings with stories, hopes, and dignity. During one poignant reunion, an elderly rancher took the microphone, his voice diminished by age but his message unmistakable. He spoke with heartfelt clarity. You boys came here as enemies, but you left as friends. And now, you're returning as family." The room erupted into applause that lasted for 5 long minutes, as tears and embraces replaced hostility with understanding. No one's eyes remained dry. The numbers tell a compelling story. 425,000 German POWs, spread across some 46 states, in nearly 700 camps, contributing millions, if not billions, of dollars worth of agricultural labor during the war years. Over 5,000 of these former prisoners later made their way to the United States as legal immigrants. Yet, beyond mere statistics, the real story lies in the profound transformations that took place. These Nazi soldiers became Texas cowboys, enemies turned into neighbors, driven by the simple power of hospitality and human kindness. Propaganda had painted a picture of barbarism and brutality, but what the prisoners encountered was a nation abundant not just in material wealth, but in spirit, confident enough to show mercy and generosity, strong enough to forgive and to heal. The Germans, expecting to find American barbarism, instead discovered abundance, an abundance that extended beyond material possessions to a vast well of kindness and empathy. Their captors, many of whom believed they would face harshness, found a different reality, a country capable of mercy, a nation secure enough in itself to be generous to those it had deemed enemies. One prisoner of war, writing his final letter from Camp Milan, expressed this newfound understanding by telling his mother, "The Americans are cowboys," just like Goebbels said. But he never told us cowboys could be kind. It was a poignant reminder that beneath the rugged exterior lay a well of compassion that could surprise even the most hardened enemies, reflecting the true spirit of America, a spirit rooted in human decency, resilience, and hope. He never revealed to us that they would, in the end, share their provisions, their skills, and even their innate sense of humanity with us. He never hinted that they would take the time to teach us how to ride horses through the rugged, sun-baked plains or show us how to repair the battered tractors that kept our farms running. He never mentioned that they would extend their hands in genuine friendship and offer us a handshake, symbolizing more than mere courtesy. And he certainly never spoke the full truth about anything, choosing instead to keep us in the dark, shrouded in lies and propaganda. The reality, however, was far simpler and more profound than any official narrative could ever convey. In the vast expanses of the American West, where the skies stretch endlessly and the land is scarred by history, German prisoners of war were confronted with a revelation that transcended the boundaries of nationality, ideology, and even conflict itself. They discovered an unsettling yet enlightening truth, that enemies, often portrayed as monstrous villains in propagandist stories, are ultimately just strangers, individuals they haven't yet learned to understand or work alongside. They realize that harboring hatred is incompatible with the cycle of harvests and the rhythms of life in the rural heartlands. They came as soldiers loyal to the Third Reich, carrying the weight of war and ideology. Yet, in the end, they departed as cowboys, simple, rugged figures who embodied a way of life rooted in resilience, independence, and community. Amidst the golden dust of Texas cotton fields, beneath the looming shadows cast by mesas in New Mexico, and beneath the relentless glare of the desert sun in Arizona, these soldiers learned the most perilous lesson that a totalitarian worldview can ever face. They learned that the men they had been trained to see as enemies were human beings, just as complex and capable of kindness as themselves. What was perhaps even more startling was that they, too, had become human, capable of compassion, understanding, and change, despite the ideologies that had once defined them. This realization struck at the very core of their beliefs, transforming notions of us and them into a recognition of shared humanity, capable of breaking down even the strongest barriers built by hatred and aggression.